chapter 21, and in chapter 21, Merlin and Halia were transported to Halia's ancient home that they left because evil spirits had taken over. And Merlin has to go speak to the oracle to figure out who stole the Galator, and Halia thinks the best way to go about this is to go to the village where the oracle seekers typically go first. But she's hesitant of this town because it's full of men who hunt the deer. And, you know, her being a deer person is a little bit hesitant of them. But she agreed to go with him anyway. And they are about to traverse into the cliffs to try to find this town. So let's read chapter 22, A Chill Wind. Halia guided me over the slippery, mussel-laden rocks to a sharp cleft at the base of the nearest cliff. There we found a thin, winding trail covered with dust as black as the cliffs themselves. Wordlessly, we followed it inland for some distance before turning left on another trail, then right on another. Soon we had made so many turns that I would have lost my bearings completely but for the constant presence of the cliffs towering above us. All the while, as we wormed our way through the sheer buttresses and piles of black rock, we stayed alert for any signs of the mountain spirits. In time, the sounds and smells of the sea began to fade. The trail we were following gradually widened a bit. To our left appeared a string of stubby fields, while to our right the dark cliffs loomed, separated from us by a row of steep, rocky hillocks. The sun, partly shrouded by a line of clouds, hung low to the west, casting golden rays on the grasses streaked with the auburns and reds of autumn. By the field, where 4 or 5 sheep grazed, heedless of us, Halia stopped. Cautiously, she surveyed the lengthening shadows. "I don't know which worries me more," she said, her eyes darting from side to side, "the absence of spirits or the presence of men." "I'm worried about something else," I said grimly. "Time! There's just 3 days left before I must face Valdirg, with or without the Galator. Even if this oracle can help me find it, I still have to get back somehow, and learn how to use it." She gave her flowing hair a shake and began combing its tangles with her fingers. "And one more thing, Merlin." My eyebrows lifted. "You still have to get back to the dwarves' territory. No little bound from there. While you can, if you choose, run like a deer, you'll still need to allow at least 2 days for the journey, which leaves you only 1 day to find the Galator." Pondering her words, I scraped the ground with my boot, the same boot I had used to try to save the baby dragon. I had failed in that attempt. Would I also fail in this one? A rock suddenly clattered down from the cliffs above. Halia started, her hand tugged anxiously at her hair. "The spirits." I held her gaze. "You don't have to come any farther, you know. You've already done more than I would have asked." "I know." Her back straightened. "Even so, I shall stay with you a little longer, to the village, but there I must leave you." She glanced at the shadowed cliffs, "and wish you whatever luck is left in this land." So very much I wanted to tell her thanks, and something more, something beyond words, yet my throat had closed as tight as a fist. As her hands went back to combing her tangled hair, she turned and started slowly down the trail. I stared past her toward the rocky hillocks and smoking crags behind. The sun's rays, piercing the gathering clouds, had deepened from gold to orange, yet the cliffs seemed darker than ever, darker than my second sight could fathom. In silence we walked. The trail swung straight into the hillocks, which pressed so close to our sides that at times the mountain itself disappeared from view. While Halia's bare feet made only the slightest shuffle on the pebbles and dust, my boots crunched with every step. Although the trail continued to grow wider, broadening into a rough road, the shadowy rock piles seemed to press all the closer. As she maneuvered deftly around a yellow-spotted snake, Halia gave me a worried look. The Wheel of Way, as an oracle, must have a strong magic of its own, but it may not be stronger than Rita Gower's spirits. That might even be why he sent them here, to destroy it, or make it serve his purposes. I kept striding. Shadows deepened all around us. Under my breath I replied, "I only hope that he himself is not among them." She inhaled sharply. "You really think he might be?" "I don't know. It's just that, Well, I can't shake the feeling he's more involved than we know. Not just with the spirit's return, but with other things as well. The Krelixes, for example. Why did they come back just now? And the outbreak of Negatus Mysterium, strong enough to steal the Galator from right under Domnu's warty brow. Maybe even, though I can't explain why, the murder of all those baby dragons. She studied me doubtfully. That's like saying the crying of a fawn is connected to the stirring of oak leaves in the wind. Exactly, I declared, for connected they are. I don't understand why or how, just that somehow they are. Her face pensive, she continued along the rock-strewn road. You sound almost like someone else. A moment later, we rounded a bend and suddenly halted. Before us, lit by the reddening rays, rose 3 columns of smoke. Not from the cliffs, but from chimneys. The village. Halia tensed, one foot twisting anxiously on the pebbles. I'm frightened. I took her arm. You don't have to go any farther. She shook free. I know, but I'll decide when I'm turning back, not you. Together, we continued walking. The high-walled hillocks on both sides receded, opening into a compact valley. There, scored by shadows, sat a ramshackle settlement, made of the very slabs that dotted its stony field. The huts, 7 or 8 in all, looked like nothing more than square piles of rock. The roof of one had fallen in, but no one seemed to care enough to repair it. But for the smoke streaming from the chimneys, the sheep gnawing at the few tussocks of grass, and the pair of huddled figures leaning against the wall of the largest building, the whole village could have been mistaken for the rocky outcroppings around it. Rising sharply from the far end of the valley, the mountain surged into smoking crags, dark and foreboding. Halia rolled her head, sniffing the air. You see what I was saying about this place? Just look at it. Whatever people live here haven't joined with the land. Never have. See there? Not a single garden or flower box or even a bench to sit upon. Most of those huts don't even have any windows. I nodded. The kind of place where people come to escape from trouble, or maybe cause it. A few raindrops splattered us. I glanced at the thick bank of clouds now obscuring the horizon. Arms of clouds, writhing like dark serpents, stretched toward the cliffs. The wind blew cold and hard out of the west, promising more rain shortly. There would be no sunset tonight, and probably no stars for some time. Grimly, I pondered the cliffs. I can't hope to climb up there in a storm. Whether or not I can learn something useful, I'll need to wait out the worst of it in the village. As soon as it starts to clear and some stars emerge, I'll leave. Until then, I'll just say I'm a traveler passing through. 2 travelers, declared Halia. She blew a long breath. Though I'd rather find shelter in the rocks, believe me, no matter how hard it rains. Are you sure? She lifted her chin a bit higher. No, but I'm coming anyway. The chill wind shoved us along the road, which skirted the edge of the village, more continuing up the narrow valley. More clouds rolled in, obscuring all but the nearest huts. More quickly than I expected, the rain swelled into a shower, then a downpour. Thunder echoed off the crags, pounding like celestial hooves. By the time we reached the larger building, sheets of rain slapped against the stone roof. The 2 huddled figures we had seen from a distance had already gone inside, leaving the roughly planked door ajar. After shaking the water from my hair and wringing out the sleeves of my tunic, I peered inside. Not much to see, just a peat fire sputtering in the hearth, a few spare tables and chairs, and a bent, white-haired fellow emerging from another room. This was, apparently, some sort of tavern. The old fellow, who wore a waiter's apron, was carrying a clay bowl in his hands. From the room he was leaving, someone bellowed at him, so loudly that he nearly dropped the bowl. Meekly, he nodded, plunging the tips of his sagging mustache into its steaming contents. "My broth!" roared a man from a table nearby the fire. Bring my dog-damned broth." Hurriedly, the old waiter brought over the bowl. The man tore it away, planted his feet on the wall beside the fire, then drained the broth in 3 swallows. He tossed the bowl to the floor, where it shattered into pieces. Even as the old fellow stooped to clean up the mess, the man shouted at him again. "Fetch some more peat for the fire, will you? I'm wet and cold, can't you see? What sort of rat's hole inn is this, that you freeze your guests like corpses? The old fellow, his white hair all askew, holding the chips of pottery in his apron, headed toward the adjacent room. He stumbled past the other man, who had come in from the rain, now seated in a dimly lit corner, tearing roughly at some dried meat. Although the hood of his black cloak obscured his face entirely, his manner conveyed the same surliness as the man by the fire. With a frown at Halia, I pulled open the door. Its squeal was drowned out by the cacophony of the rain on the roof, but the heads of both men immediately turned our way. Even though the hooded man's face remained in shadow, I could almost feel the harshness of his gaze. Halia, close behind me, hesitated in the doorway. "By the corpse's death," grumbled the man by the hearth. "Close the dog-damned door!" His eyes, like his coarse beard, glowed red in the firelight. "You'll give me a dog-damned fever, you will!" She looked for an instant as if she were on the edge of bolting, but stepped inside and shut the door. I nodded toward the rough-hewn table at the opposite end of the room. While it sat not far from the other man, whose black hood still dripped from the rain, he seemed likely to be a better neighbor than the ranter by the hearth. As we moved toward the table, the white-haired waiter returned, bending even lower than before under the weight of a few clumps of peat. He barely glanced at us as we passed. Suddenly, the hooded man leaped to his feet. A rusted dagger glinted in his hand. Before I could draw my own blade, he kicked over the table, knocking me backward into Halia. We fell in a heap on the floor. The man, bundled in his heavy cloak, scurried past us. Even as we regained our feet, the creaky door slammed shut. I ran after him, pulled open the door, and scanned the rain-soaked road, the stone huts, the dreary field. No sign of him anywhere. Pushing the wet locks off my brow, I turned back to Halia. "He's disappeared." "Why would he do that?" she asked, shaken. "We didn't threaten him." "Ye came too awfully close, me dear." It was the white-haired man, having rid himself of the load of peat. Still, he hunched so low that his wrinkled brow came no higher than the middle of Halia's chest. "Ye disturbed his privacy, ye see." She scowled. Such a friendly village. The old man gave a tense, wheezing laugh. "So friendly, me dear. It don't even have a proper name, or any long-time residence, but for Master Lugade, who owns this public house, and me, old Backod, and all few lame sheep." He glowered at the bearded man by the fire. "It's a mean-hearted place, me dear. I can assure ye that. Just a place worth avoidin' if ye can." With a heave, I righted the table. "Do you mind if we sit here a little while, just to dry off?" Bacod's white hair, toppled over his ears, swagged from side to side, along with his greasy mustache. "As long as ye pay before ye eatin' anything, Master Lugade shouldn't object." He pulled out a rag and began wiping the table. "Just mind who ye sit near if ye wish to stay healthful." "We will." I brushed some moldy cheese off a chair, then sat down next to Halia. "By the way," I asked, as nonchalantly as I could, "where does that old road out there lead? Surely not up into the cliffs." The old man continued wiping. "Ah, that little pathway is older than meself. Older than the rocks, perhaps. It just curves about this valley like a coilin' snake, not leadin' anywhere." His raspy voice lowered a notch. "Some say it was the ghosts who made it." "Ghosts?" "From up the mountain. Ye haven't heard of them, me lad? Well, then, ye needs to know, that's certain, since ye are journeying hereabouts." He ceased wiping and glanced around fearfully, as if the chairs and tables themselves might be listening. Finally, he rasped, "They're angry, and so very vengeful. Your life is safe, perhaps, in this little valley, but anywhere on the mountain, well, ye'd rather be pierced by 1,000 spears before letting 'em take ye." Nervously, he tugged on his mustache. Then he turned to Halia. His voice lowered ominously. "Death. That'd be a kindness, though, compared to what they'd be doing to your heart, to your innards, and worse yet, to your everlasting soul, if they found ye was a dear person." Her eyes swelled to their widest. In a flash, she bolted for the door, threw it open, and vanished into the rain. I glared at Bacod. "You old fool!" He shrunk away from me. "Just wanted to be helpful, I did." Tempted as I was to give him a fright of his own, I turned and sprinted after Halia. Just as I reached the doorway, I caught a glimpse of her dashing behind the hut with the fallen roof. Beyond, darker than even the sky itself, I could see the ragged edge of the cliffs rising above the valley. "Halia!" I cried, charging after her. Mud sprayed from my boots as rivers ran down my neck and arms. Thunder slammed against the mountainside. Sliding to a halt by the collapsed hut, I peered into the torrent. Nothing. Nothing but rain. At that instant, I heard a whisper just behind me. Merlin. I whirled around. There, under an overhanging slab of rock, all that remained of the crumbled roof, cowered Halia. Ducking under the slab, I joined her in the hollow. I placed my arms around her sobbing shoulders, holding her shivering body close to mine. Several minutes passed. The downpour did not relent. At last, though, her shivers subsided. She began to breathe more normally. I felt her relax, leaning her head against my shoulder. Rain splattered all around as a chill wind sliced through our clothing. Yet somehow I did not feel cold. All at once, Halia stiffened. Before I could move, the blade of a dagger pressed between my shoulder blades. Okay, my friends, that is the end of chapter 22. So tomorrow we will read chapter 23 called Dagger Point. So join me then. Have a wonderful night.